Welcome to the next topic for discussion. Overall, this lecture will address the rise of industry in the United States in the years following the Civil War. There are many issues to be discussed in this lecture, but first we'll address some of the concepts. As one investigates the rise of industry in the United States, it's important to learn about several leading industrialists. Some have described these men as captains of industry, while others have criticized them with the label robber baron. Based on their actions, you can evaluate their activities for yourself. A second issue to be discussed will be the working conditions faced by laborers in the United States. Conditions were often dangerous, and pay wasn't great. We'll see how they reacted to their lot in life. Finally, you may want to think about an important overriding concept or question. By 1900, the United States had become a major industrial power. Was it worth the cost it took to become industrialized? That's for you to decide. A good place to start might be a discussion of the profiles of three important individuals who impacted American industry during this era. Let's begin with Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie's life is truly a rags-to-riches American success story. He was born in Scotland in 1835 and migrated to the United States at the age of 12. His first job after he arrived in the U.S. was for $1.20 a week. He worked as a bobbin boy in a textile mill. From there, he eventually became involved in the Pennsylvania Railroad and eventually made millions of dollars in the steel industry. Carnegie realized that the common denominator for much of the United States industrial expansion during this time period was steel. This was necessary for the construction of skyscrapers, many large factories, and arguably the nation's leading industry, railroads. Carnegie's business philosophy was simple and effective. Watch the costs, and the profits will take care of themselves. He was famous for his use of vertical integration. His goal was to control all portions of the manufacturing process, in this case of steel, from access to raw materials to the distribution of the steel. He sold out in 1901 for $500 million, and he was well known after that point for his philanthropy. It's estimated that he ended up giving away 90% of his personal fortune. John Rockefeller is another person I'd like to talk about, and he became involved in the oil industry in the late 1800s. In 1870, he formed Standard Oil. He was famous for cutting costs as well as paying attention to details. In fact, he once regulated the number of drops of solder which could be used to seal kerosene cans in order to cut costs with that production line. One thing that he was famous for was undercutting his competition by lowering prices, getting rid of any competition, and then raising the prices back to a profitable level. This image portrays Rockefeller Standard Oil as a greedy octopus ready to devour taxpayers, other businesses, and maybe even politicians. One thing that's interesting about Rockefeller is that he was never able to escape this negative image, even though he was involved in many philanthropic enterprises, just as Carnegie was at the same time. Rockefeller demonstrated his success in more than one way. He showed vertical integration by purchasing his own tanker cars so he could transport his oil to people who bought his products himself. He also represented horizontal integration by maintaining a near monopoly over the oil industry by controlling about 90% of the nation's oil refining capacity by 1879. Thomas Edison was born in Ohio in 1847 and eventually held a patent to several hundred different inventions. Among other things, he invented the phonograph, the motion picture camera, and while he didn't invent the light bulb, he did perfect its use so that it would be a reliable, long-lasting source of light for many. In 1876, he established his so-called invention factory located in Menlo Park, New Jersey. This image suggests how Edison's light bulb would have an impact worldwide after its perfection in the late 1870s. Menlo Park became a leading research facility and a model for many other corporations because Edison created several different research teams so that a variety of different projects could be pursued at the same time. Edison is important because his success came to symbolize the inventive impulse of Americans. All you needed to do was to work hard at a problem, lock yourself up in a laboratory, and American intuition and know-how would lead to a solution to help impact everybody and improve their lives. Through the actions of many, the United States became a major industrial power by 1900. However, it came at quite a cost to the nation. First of all, the environment was altered at a much higher pace. The earth itself was ripped open to mine coal, iron, and other precious metals. Many rivers and streams, and even the air, became polluted. Factory life wasn't always an improvement over life on a farm. Very often people were dehumanized as they worked in huge factories under dangerous conditions. We'll explore some of the experiences faced by laborers next. A good place to start would be an investigation of some of the general conditions facing workers in the late 19th century. Labor and management very often were in conflict with one another in the 1800s. However, contrary to the way this is shown in this political cartoon, labor and management weren't always on equal terms. There were a variety of general characteristics which faced workers in 1900 that were new compared to previous years. Under the old perspective, in many cases, laborers would work in very small shops. They could take pride in their work and work at their own pace. Yes, they had to get their job done, but they could work fast for a while and then slow down a little bit and fast for a while again. Under the new perspective, they worked in very large factories, and they very often were lost in the hustle and bustle of the fast and repetitive pace of their work, which very often was set by the clock and the whistle. Today, we think of a 40-hour work week as the norm. However, it wouldn't be outside the norm to work 55 or maybe even 65 hours a week back in 1900. Workers also faced very dangerous conditions. 1889 was the first year reliable statistics were kept for the railroad industry, and in that year, over 2,000 workers died, while 20,000 were injured on the job. There was a wide range of wages for skilled versus unskilled workers in the late 1800s. A skilled worker, like a bricklayer, might earn $3 a day. An unskilled worker, just a general laborer, would earn less than half of that at $1.30 a day. The lowest wage workers were southern mill workers, earning 84 cents a day. Some of the toughest working conditions for laborers were seen in the steel industry. Typically, shifts were 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, because the furnaces needed to be kept running. Once each month, they would receive a day off. This was partially because workers were generally divided into two groups. At the beginning of the month, one group would work a day shift. Another would work the night shift. After 2 weeks, they would experience a shift change. The day shift would change to the nights, and the night shift would switch to the days. This allowed one of those groups to have an entire day off. However, this meant the other group of employees would have to work 24 hours straight. Maybe this is why workers in the steel industry experienced so many accidents over the years. There were lots of different people who worked in the factories, men as well as women and children. I'd like to talk about conditions facing women and children next. Child laborers made up an important part of the U.S. workforce. Very often they were sought out because they were paid low wages, and their physical size made them attractive for certain jobs. By 1900, almost 2 million children worked for wages in the United States. Oftentimes, they acted like children and they weren't supervised very much. Therefore, this led to many accidents. Here we see children working in a variety of different capacities. In the upper left, we see someone working in a glass factory. On the bottom right, we see children in the textile mills. There were many children who worked in southern textile mills doing a variety of different jobs. Women had always worked in farming communities, however they had a unique role in the factories. Very often employers would seek out women because they believed that they could pay them less than their male counterparts. By 1900, 17% of the workforce was female. By the 1890s, with the invention of the telephone and the typewriter, women with a high school education could have additional opportunities and could work under safer conditions, as shown in these images here. Next, we can explore the emergence of unions in the late 1800s. People responded to the conditions that they faced in those factories in a variety of ways. One was to organize unions. One of the first important unions was the Knights of Labor. This was founded in 1869, and membership expanded under the leadership of Terence Powderly. One of the things that made the K of L very unique was that membership was open to all laborers, and by the 1880s they had over 700,000 members. Now there were a variety of goals that they sought to bring about in the United States. Among them included equal pay for women, an end to child labor, and they also wanted to limit Chinese immigration. There was one limit to membership in the Knights of Labor. The Knights of Labor took a strong stance against Chinese immigration because they saw many of the Chinese workers as competitors for the same jobs. In fact, in some western states, like Washington, in the 1880s, there were movements against Chinese members of the community. The Knights of Labor also sought an 8-hour workday and a graduated income tax at a time when there was no federal tax on people's incomes. Conflicts between labor and management, which led to violence, hurt the Knights of Labor. The best example of this would be the Haymarket Square riot, which took place in 1886. In May of that year, workers in Chicago held a series of general strikes to, among other things, rally support for an 8-hour day. Later, when police broke up a battle between striking union members and non-union strikebreakers, 2 unionists were shot and killed by police. On May 4th, strike sympathizers held a rally in Haymarket Square. A bomb exploded and 7 police officers were killed, as well as 4 demonstrators. Association with violence like this hurt the Knights of Labor. Below are some hyperlinks to additional information, as well as images associated with the events which took place at Haymarket Square. While membership in the Knights of Labor waned by the late 1880s, a more focused union, the American Federation of Labor, was able to be more successful. This was formed in 1884 with Samuel Gompers as its head. Instead of being open to all workers, this was a union of skilled workers. They had similar goals to the Knights of Labor, but with a little bit different focus. They also fought for an 8-hour day, but another thing that they supported was employer liability for any injuries that were incurred on the job by workers. By 1904, they boasted 1.6 million members. The bottom line with unions is that in many cases by the late 1800s we see the origins of our modern unions being put in place. However, one thing to keep in mind is that only about 5% of the workforce was unionized by the late 1800s. Individuals, like Andrew Carnegie and many others, fought to break the unions. We'll see union membership grow dramatically by the 1930s. The last topic I'd like to address as I look at the rise of industry would be modern advertising techniques, which became common by the late 1800s. As the nation industrialized, we also see the emergence of modern advertising techniques as different companies tried to encourage people to purchase their products. Companies that we might find familiar, like Quaker Oats and Ivory Soap, got their start during this time period. I happen to like the motto associated with Kodak cameras the best. Their motto was, "You press the button, and we do the rest," to encourage people to purchase their easy-to-use cameras. On the right, we see an advertisement for the Florence lamp stove. Here are 2 advertisements, one on the left for sewing machines, and one on the right for Duluth Imperial Bread. I think they take a unique approach to trying to encourage people to purchase these products. Here we see an advertisement for electric belts. Look at all the things that it cures: dyspepsia, rheumatism, and even gout. Hey, maybe I should get one of these things. One of the things that I find interesting about these ads is that there were very few regulations established by the national government. We'll see how this will change by the early 1900s. This lecture has addressed the rise of industry in the United States in the late 1800s. We'll conclude with a few final thoughts. Over the course of the time period discussed today, the United States became a major world power, and was led in this endeavor by people like Andrew Carnegie, John Rockefeller, and Thomas Edison. One group which should not be left out of the story, however, would be the individual laborers upon whose backs the nation's economy was transformed. Workers in the U.S. had to endure long hours and dangerous conditions just to make ends meet. Some joined unions, but many others didn't have this chance. One final thing to consider would be the question: did the benefits of industrialization outweigh the costs? What do you think? Well, have a great day. The next couple of slides will show some of the sources of information that I used for this lecture, as well as some hyperlinks to additional information about the rise of industry in the late 1800s. Take care.